showing up. I appreciate it. This is the first in a three-part dialogue series. And heading into the election, we thought that this was a really good, not only message to kind of present, but rather than just present the message, to literally dialogue about it and hear a discussion, not only from our perspective. So the three-part series, we're going to bring in some alumni, we're going to have student groups, and we wanted to bring in some people with outside expertise so that there's a well-rounded discussion about the topic, which is not just the election and politics in general, but more importantly, how do we go forward with this era of bipartisanship, collaboration, cooperation, and civility? Right? We all look at the political landscape now, and we can see that the country is very divided. And traditionally, we always find our way back, and that's what we want to do moving forward, and is really your generation that's going to be leading the way in bringing us back to a place of civility and togetherness. So this first discussion, we brought in some folks. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, but we do have some alumni here as well, so can we just get a welcome back to them? That subtle reminder, once a brave, always a brave, always trying to bring people back into the fold and continue to enhance that experience. So I'll just start right here on my left. We'll go down the line, quick introductions.
John Dillon, class of 78.
Good morning, my name is Fadi Kadura, and I'm honorably served Senate District 30, which is the north side of Indianapolis.
Hi, I'm Bart Peterson. I just left, just retired from being the CEO of Crystal House International, a global schools network, and I think I'm here because I'm a former mayor of Indianapolis.
I'm Megan Savage, class of 2000. I am VP of External Affairs for a company called the Heritage Group, and I think I'm here because I used to be chief of staff on Capitol Hill with Congresswoman Susan Brooks.
Good morning. My name is Ted Frantz. I am a parent of two students here, a senior and a sophomore, but that's not why I'm here. I am a historian by trade, and I'm the chair at the University of Indianapolis of the Department of History and Political Science.
Also, good morning. My name is Kent Eastwood, class of 1991, also a parent of a student here, and I am the elected Boone County Prosecutor.
All right, so as we said, we do have a robust and esteemed panel here. So I want to jump right in, and I'm going to provide a little bit of context. We're talking about, the theme today is bridging the political divide. And like I said, we are at a place where when you look, it seems like we are bitterly divided in this country and becoming increasingly more polarized. We're not at a place where people are getting caned on the House floor anymore, thankfully, but there is some animosity there. That's not always been the case. A lot of times in our country, historically, parties have come together and passed legislation that has helped people all across the country, and that's what we want to get back to. So first question for the panel, and I don't want to do it where we just kind of go down the row and let's just take the conversation where it goes, but can you point to historically, currently, any piece of legislation that you think is a model of good bipartisan efforts?
Where do you want to start?
Anywhere. It could be locally, nationally, whoever has an idea, jump in, and then we'll just go from there.
And hold the mic. I think the best example that's close to home is Senator Todd Young's CHIPS and Science Act. He worked with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who is a progressive Democrat from New York, on a bill to improve American competitiveness and security, onshoring chips, manufacturing, and all kind of future technologies, and enabling that to happen in our country, not happening across the world. So I think that's the best big example that hits close to home that I can give right now.
In the last couple of years, there was a piece of legislation that went through the Indiana House and Senate, police reform bill. And that would be an example recently, something that never would have passed before. And because of what happened during the pandemic and during the riots that we had throughout the country, both parties came together, and I think there was a lot of compromise on that bill. And so that would be another example recently in Indiana, specifically with our legislature.
As I said, I'm John Dillon, and I wanted to clarify two things. First of all, I was Chief Deputy Mayor and Chief of Staff for the Honorable Bart Peterson, and when the history books are written under civility and leadership, Mayor Peterson will be in the lead chapter. So just realize that. A quick comment about all of you. As you go through and get your diplomas, you will then be joining a society that is low-key but brilliant and leaders of our country called Brebeuf Nation. We're taking over Indianapolis, we're taking over Indiana, and now we're East Coast to West Coast, and I expect all of you to be big participants in that nation. The best example that I can come to you with on cooperation, Indianapolis Colts come to Mayor Peterson and myself, and they go, guys, we're leaving Indianapolis, we're going to LA, because we don't like our stadium. Now, as you can imagine, that puts the mayor in a difficult position, so he had to put together a plan with a partisan legislature and a different party governor to build Lucas Oil Stadium, which was very contentious, but he maintained his civility the entire time to the point that we even gave it up to make sure the stadium is built and we kept the Colts here. Now, can you imagine if we had lost the Indianapolis Colts? You guys would have thought that was too cruel. So that is my best example of real life that you should be aware of.
Yeah, give it a round of applause for our mayor. Since we're here all to praise our mayor today, I'm going to double down on that. I serve in the Indiana State Senate, and I'll tell you, he didn't pay us to say that, I promise. I served in the Indiana State Senate. I was elected 4 years ago. Until today, what I hear from my colleagues, they say, you know, we need more examples like Mayor Peterson, who used to spend a lot of time at the State House working with the opposite party to get things done. So he was an example of a servant leader who really put our people above politics. An example of a good piece of legislation in addition to House Bill 1006 from a few years ago. 2 years ago, we passed almost unanimously Senate Bill 1, which was a bill that dealt with mental health issues. And as a father of two daughters who recently graduated from high school, 16 and 19, I can tell you there are reports that show that half of Indiana high school students tend to have their own struggles. Sometimes you feel that you don't belong. Sometimes the stress of school and work and all of that is something that impacts you. So I was very proud that we came together, Republicans and Democrats, focused on the policy, used data and science and the recommendations of the commission to really work with one another to pass that legislation. It brings the greatest joy to my heart when I work with my colleagues across the aisle and get things done for our people.
Yeah, let me just inject a slightly different note into this, because the first two things I thought of were the CHIPS Act and the Indianapolis Colts deal that we worked on 20 plus years ago. But I also think it's important to remember there's always going to be partisanship. There's always going to be, our democracy is set up to be competitive. And a well-functioning democracy should be competitive. And when you have competition, it's going to be rough and tumble from time to time. I'll get into this a little bit later, but the news media focuses 100% on the conflict. That's how they get you to watch. That's how they get you to read. That's how they engage you. We all know this. And so what we don't see is where the cameras are not. And the cameras are not often on the kind of work that Senator Cadora was talking about, the kind of work that Megan and John and Kent were talking about. There's a lot more of that goes on than the battles over the wedge issues like immigration and abortion that is all we see in the news today. So I think that's really important to keep in mind.
To echo what you're saying, there's an article out there It did an analysis of the Indiana State House and the bills passed between 2019 and 2023. And 92.7% have bipartisan support. So when you look at Indiana, while we do have the Republicans have a supermajority, am I saying that right?
Correct.
While they have a supermajority, there is bipartisanship happening at the State House. 92.7% of all the laws passed in those 4 years had bipartisan support. You don't hear that enough. As Mayor Peterson was saying, you hear about the conflict, right?
All right, so on that same note, the only way that people would recognize a stat like that is by communication, right? So in that communication, how do you think elected officials and even candidates can model that kind of collaborative and respectful discussion to best not only get their points across, but also to demonstrate I may be supportive of A, B, and C, but also I have respect for people who think X, Y, and Z.
Let me give you a thought. And I think this is important for your era. Imagine a football field. Put your 50-yard line, put your 40-yard lines, put your 20-yard lines. The 20-yard lines is called the red zone. When discussions get into the red zone, far left or far right, they lock down. Go back to your 40-yard lines. It's okay to lean a little left. It's okay to lean a little right. But what we have lost is being practical and being civil. So in order to move things forward, you've got to compromise, you've got to be civil, and the most important word, you've got to be practical. Keep it within the 40s and move forward.
I would imagine that some of the names that come to my mind as a historian whose specialty is those railroad presidents with beards, most of whom were from Ohio that many of you don't know. You probably don't even think back 50 years ago to names like Richard Lugar and Lee Hamilton. Are those names well known to all of you students out there? Maybe. I've got a couple nods, right? But it has been baked into the DNA of Indiana politicians in particular. And for years, I moved here in 2002, Senator Lugar, who was a Republican, Lee Hamilton, who is a Democrat, would get together and they would model, among other things, that kind of civility and say that on a majority of the issues they agree, and on a couple they disagree, and that was the game and how it was played. Lee Hamilton, who was elected to Congress in 1964, representing the area south of Bloomington, a district that has changed numbers so many times we won't get into it. That's not traditionally a place where Democrats thrive, especially in your lifetime. But he told me that among other things, they moved out as congressmen, usually then, and then congresspeople used to do with their whole family. And they lived in DC. And so on the national scene, I would just say one of the things that made it, I think, easier to compromise. And he said, it's a lot harder to hate somebody on the other side when your kids are in the same school play together. And you know that they're good people. And I think part of the issue is that the coming together that used to happen, especially on the national side, it might not happen as much in those social situations. So we think of this, all of these people up here except for me have practiced politics in an important way. And so we think of this as being something that they maybe clock in and clock out, but they're listening to people at all times, and when you watch them interact, you realize, oh, okay, they understand that on maybe 5% of the issues they might disagree, maybe it's 10, but on the other parts they can work together. And I think that's one of the things that if we expected more just being in community from some of those leaders, we might see some of those values reflected in the way politics are practiced a little bit more.
I will share a couple of personal examples. I think to me the question of how you work with others, it boils down for me to the concept of purpose and authenticity. When I was born overseas for a Muslim Palestinian family, went to Christian school for 12 years of my life, raised on the hands of nuns and Christian leaders, and I lived in a Jewish neighborhood. So at an early age, I was immersed in different communities and different cultures, and it made me, at a very early age, appreciate and understand the value of humanity and compassion, and seeing the other for who they are, a human being, a decent human being. And when I came to the United States, I met my wife in Louisiana. She was born and raised in the United States. My kids were born and raised in the United States. 11 days before 9/11, before many of you were born, her brother, my brother-in-law, was killed at his family business. He was 25 years old. When murder impacts communities, it does not distinguish your race, ethnicity, your social or economic status, or where you came from. 2005, my oldest daughter was born first week of August. She's a second year at IU. 3 weeks after she was born, we became homeless after Hurricane Katrina. And natural disasters do not discriminate based on your faith, your background, where you came from, or any of these metrics. Fast forward, when I came to Indiana, my first job was an intern in the Indiana State Senate. And after that, I worked for a Republican governor. I worked for Governor Mitch Daniels. Have you heard about Governor Mitch Daniels? After Governor Mitch Daniels left, I worked under Governor Mike Pence, a Republican. I disagree on many policies with Mike Pence, but I was working for an agency that served 1.6 million Hoosiers. And I thought that I can put my education and my training to serve many people across the state of Indiana. And then I worked for a Democratic mayor of the city of Indianapolis. I shared these examples with you to tell you that if you really take politics out of your filters for a second, the moment that we start looking at people based on the political lens is, to me, the moment that we lost our humanity. A Republican family or individual is not less or more important than any other person who's a Democrat, Libertarian, Independent, and so on. Hunger, homelessness, mental health, whatever the issue is, education, the streets that we drive on, they don't care if you're Republican, if you're a Democrat, or even if you're not engaged in the political system. So my message to you is, when it comes to communication with people, check with your heart. Here at school, you can practice this today. If you see one of your colleagues, one of your friends being bullied, are you the type of person who would sit on the sideline and pass by without care? Or does your heart tell you, I need to do something about this? I need to make my school a more compassionate place for everyone, where everybody's treated equally and respectfully with love and compassion. So we are being tested every single day, not only in politics, but in our schools and our households and so on. I'll conclude by sharing with you that, to the question of communication, if we start from a place of authenticity and purpose and understanding who we are and how we should treat others, then I urge you and I beg you, be open-minded, have a big heart. Don't question the integrity of people that you disagree with. At the Indiana State Senate, some of my colleagues, that 7%, 8% of bills that we disagree on, the most controversial bills, from abortion to social issues to whatever, not once have I ever questioned the integrity or the motive of my colleagues. And I understand that somebody might have different faith beliefs, somebody might come from a different background. So it is extremely important for them to represent their values and their faith and their communities, the same way that is important for me. So my message to you is, when you want to work with others, always practice not to question people's integrity. Don't call them names, and focus on the issue or the idea at hand. If you disagree with the policy, outline what are the good points about the policy, what are the negative things that you think are the consequences of that policy. And I promise you, that will earn you a lot of respect and trust when you work with people who have different points of view.
I wasn't going to say anything on this issue because I have a little bit more to say later, but I'm going to comment just based on what you saw, because my reaction, we got a hint of what these questions were going to be ahead of time, so we had a chance to think about them. And one of the things that I thought on this one is that at the end of the day, all you can do is what you can do. And so when we talk about modeling civil behavior, that starts with you. So if you're a candidate, so just like everything you just heard from Senator Fedora, I've seen him behave that way and talk that way as long as I have known him, many, many years. He's authentically what he just said. And that is what we can do. We can't change the massive forces that influence politics and government and society individually. But what we can do individually is be our best and model the kind of behavior that we want to see. So if we want to see more civil discourse, engage in more civil discourse. Don't let yourself be sucked in to the kind of rabid partisanship and ugly name-calling that we all deplore, and we say we deplore. If we deplore it, don't engage in it. That's all you can do. You can't change their forces, you can't change anybody else, but you can influence people by the way you behave yourself.
I may add one quick comment. In 1993, another historic Indiana leader, Governor Evan Bayh, asked me to be his legislative director for the 93 session. I was awful, terrible. Maybe, I think I moved up from being the worst legislative director to like the third worst. But my biggest mistake that I didn't understand, that you all need to understand, that these two gentlemen highlighted. I didn't do a good job of putting myself in the other person's shoes. I didn't understand what a person from Covington, Indiana cared about, or Winchester, Indiana cared about. All I cared about was my little mission, and it was unsuccessful because what they care about is just as important as what we care about. So keep that in the back of your mind. Don't ever think you can't put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand where they're coming from. Your shoes are a little hard to fill, but that's
One thing that Brebeuf does a great job of, and I think what everyone up here is talking about, is modeling the Ignatian way. And that's something that I think sometimes maybe when we read it here at school, you'll see it, you don't really pay attention to it maybe. But as you get older, and now as a parent, I look at the Ignatian way and how Brebeuf talks about that, that's what everyone here is talking about, is modeling that behavior, both in your personal life and your professional life.
All right, there seems to be at least the perception of compromise and collaboration being a weakness, and digging in your heels and sticking as hard as you can to what you campaign on being the better way to legislate. Two questions kind of stem from that. Why do you think that's the case? And how do we begin to reverse that and not demonize that idea of compromise and collaboration?
Yeah, I think that that the rise of collaboration and compromise being sort of dirty words, particularly compromise, has coincided with a trend that you all, I'm sure, have heard of, which is this notion that we're becoming more tribal. So Democrats, doesn't really matter what you think of another person who's a Democrat. As long as they're a Democrat, you're more on their side than the best Republican, and vice versa. And that kind of tribalism, where it's about our identity as members of a political party, far more than it is about what we actually think about issues or even what we think about individuals' character. That rise of tribalism is, I think, a big part of what has made compromise more difficult, and people in the tribe saying, well, you can't talk with somebody in the other tribe, you can't compromise with somebody in the other tribe. And I'm reading a book right now. I'm not going to recommend this to anybody. It's a pretty dense book, but it's written by an economic journalist. And I was just reading the other day that he's citing research showing that this is not a new phenomenon, of course. Nationalism, dangerous nationalism, racism, xenophobia, all of the kind of things that we're seeing, very much on the rise, not just in the United States, but around the world. These things tend to rise up more in times of financial and economic hardship. And if you think about what our country's been through, and the world's been through in the last 15 years or so, starting with the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and barely had we started to recover from that, then we had the pandemic. Overlaying all of this has been globalization and the dramatic change in our economy, in our workforce, and the loss of manufacturing jobs, and the impact on blue-collar workers. All of this stuff has made the economic circumstances of a high percentage of people in our country very difficult, and same thing around the world, and has contributed to the rise of tribalism. So in my view, and this is a whole nother thing, maybe we could do an hour on this someday, I believe income inequality is the greatest threat to society in at least in our country. I'll just speak for the United States right now. And we have seen a dramatic rise in the last 40 or 50 years in income inequality in this country, and I think it is our greatest threat, and I think it is the biggest contributor to tribalism, which is the biggest contributor to the inability of people to work together to solve problems in many cases.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think we look to government to solve all of our problems, we forget it's a representative government. So I think what we're seeing, at least in DC, is representative of where we are as a nation. We're deeply divided on all of the issues the mayor spoke about. I also think it's important to remember some perspective. I think we're in a place where we have some big personalities that are dominating, not just Trump, but in Congress, and that's what's being rewarded right now. But there are also many dozens, if not a couple hundred, members of Congress and people in the administration who are working hard every day to solve these problems. And when we're in a place where Americans are so bitterly divided, one of our best solutions might be not a lot of big policies moving forward. So it's upsetting to me. I love Congress. I love my time there, and I hate to see it so kind of vitriolic right now, but I do think we'll find a way through because these things ebb and flow over time, and that's how a democracy works. We're allowed to have people speak out in ugly ways, and then we'll get back to a place where that's no longer rewarded because good people like you will stand up and be doing it a different way, and I think with time that will become rewarded by the electorate.
So that's cycles of American history. If you guys have about 6 days or so, I could try to unpack that a little bit more, but I certainly see that in what's happened. When you think through where we are as a country right now, I think one potential answer is that all of you have grown up in such a hyper-segmented media landscape that such a thing as watching local news or national news networks, nobody does anymore. So you're getting on your device and you're seeing, for the most part, a worldview that you already agree with, and you're fed more and more of that. So that your question, Mr. Abdel, was about perception. There's a difference between perception and reality. And I, without holding the mic for the entirety of the time, I also do think these things do ebb and flow. The time period that I've cut my teeth on witnessed 3 different presidents being assassinated within one lifetime. Hyper partisanship in the way that we've only, for the first time in your lifetime, seen something approaching that, unfortunately, tragically, this year with assassination attempts. That used to stem directly from political disagreement. What followed that era was a progressive era. And without doing a super, super long dive, that was driven by people who wanted their communities to address the substantial problems that they saw all around them. Often grounded in religion, but trying to do something to make the places they lived better. And so what I gotta hold out hope for is that your generation in particular will demand that sooner rather than later, and demand that the politics better reflects your values. And when that happens, I think that perception, not only that perception goes away, but the reality goes away as well.
Let me give you two real-life situations. My best friend as a child and today, if you haven't figured this out yet, I'm a Democrat. If you haven't figured that out. But my best friend was the chairman of the Republican Party. And by the way, a member of Brebeuf Nation, Murray Clark. Do you not think that we worked hand in hand to get quite a bit done when he's in the state senate and I'm at the city? You better believe we did. Secondly, Megan's close friend, one of the best congresswomen ever for the state of Indiana, was Susan Brooks. Susan Brooks is a dear friend of mine, diehard Republican. I'm viewed, I suppose, as a diehard Democrat. You better believe we got a lot done working together. It can happen if you're civil and if you're pragmatic.
I would say it's easy right now to be apathetic and just, it's nasty, it's ugly, I don't want to be involved in politics, but for democracy to work, good, quality, Brebeuf grads need to get involved. Don't be disgusted by the system and just walk away. For the democracy to continue and remain strong, good, smart people need to lean in to the hard work and do it. That's my call to you, men and women for others.
I would add one last quick thought, which is the concept of compromise. I think it's a negative connotation in the political system to say that I compromise, because no one wants to compromise their values or principles. So what we're speaking about really is not compromising your values or your principles. I think it's one of the most important things to be a person of integrity, a person that stands firm when it comes to your values and your principles. To me, compromise is different. Compromise is having the longer view of what we're trying to accomplish. For example, I might want to address the issue of childcare in the state of Indiana as quickly as possible, because I believe that early childhood education on my way to pre-K are the most critical programs to help young students succeed K through 12 and beyond. Well, that might be my priority, and I want to get there, and I come up with this legislation that would address this issue in the next couple of years. On the Republican side, some of my colleagues said, well, hold on, we don't want to do it this way, we want to do incremental change. My legislation didn't move forward, but I added myself as a co-author in my Republican colleagues' legislation because it was incremental change. So the fact that I didn't get everything that I want doesn't mean that I can't support good legislation, even though the progress that legislation does not get at the issue as fast as I would like for it. So I did not compromise my principle or my value of saying I care about this issue. But as John said, I was more pragmatic about its incremental positive change. And any good idea, there's no monopoly on good ideas. They come from Republicans and Democrats and independents and people who are not engaged in the system. So I always urge you, if you hear someone say, compromise your values, your principles, my response to that would be, I don't compromise my values and principles, but I'm very pragmatic. Let's work together to get something done. So don't mistakenly think that you have to be wishy-washy, because that goes against the concept of integrity. If you change what you believe in just to satisfy somebody else, that's not integrity. Integrity is to be able to speak your position, your opinion, and your values, and find commonality or common ground to work with someone towards making progress for that good.
All right. One of the things that we pride ourselves on in preparing our students is to be open to growth, right? To be able to go out into the world and have an open mind, take on different perspectives, and help formulate your own. When it comes to their political awareness or political ideology, there's going to be a lot of influences. And we kind of talked about that with media. So what role do you see media, civic organizations they may join, or even here, our school, what role does that play in helping them foster a sense of collaboration?
You just hit my hot button. I have a recommendation, Mr. Principal, that Brebeuf immediately needs to start a class that debunks fake news. Fake news is a critical component of why we are in this spiral of uncivility that continues on. If you would check what's going on in Finland, they have very structured classes researching all social media releases, all media releases with an eye toward fake news. I assure you, Brebeuf Future Nation, the facts are stubborn. The facts are stubborn. Do your research and get to the truth. Don't just read it on your phone. Don't just think you heard about it on some social media outlet. Do your research. Get to the truth. And I think that's a responsibility of the school.
I echo that. I think it's a responsibility of the school, particularly like Brebeuf, to teach all about our civic institutions, how to operate within them, how to question them appropriately. But I also think it's incumbent upon all of us as Americans to do our research and educate ourselves. You know, if you see something in the Washington Post, check out the Wall Street Journal, check out the New York Times. Indy Star doesn't have any news in it, so I wouldn't recommend that. But I think, you know, do it your own research and dig in further. Educate yourself so you can be prepared to have the civic discourse with people who agree and disagree with you. And then when you see misinformation or you see something wrong, call it out. You know, it's incumbent upon all of us too to help enforce some societal norms. I think we've gotten away from that. We're in this kind of like anything goes society. But it's on us to model that behavior and try to correct it when we see people, you know, acting out in ways that you don't appreciate.
So I agree with everything that Megan and John have said, and I would say that the role of the school, I guess I'd phrase it my own way, which is that the role of the schools is, and this school in particular, is to encourage and teach agency. You have control over your life, you have control over what you hear. Too many people in our country, too many people across the world see themselves as sheep. They are required to follow somebody else. And I think one of the great things that school does is to focus on the importance of reflecting, or I mean, not reflecting, but actually encouraging each of you to think about what you can personally do. That you have control over your own life. You have authority, you have agency to be able to control things. You are not just the tool of somebody else. I think schools are critical in that. And also critical in, as John was talking about with fake news, helping you understand the different forces that are at play to try to manipulate you. You are being manipulated. Look, this manipulation goes back to the beginning of time. This is nothing new, but it's a lot more sophisticated now. It's a lot more high-tech now than it used to be. So understand the way that advertisements are trying to manipulate you. Understand the way that politician messages are trying to manipulate you. Understand the way that social media is trying to manipulate you. Then you can be in a better position to be able to sort through that and figure out what makes sense and what doesn't, and what's truth and what is not.
So, two thoughts on this front, and I think the first thing to your question, Mr. Hebdo, I would say is, for this audience, is to join. A lot of statistics by a lot of very accomplished scholars, unlike me, who would point to declines in civic participation. In the era that I grew up in, your parents grew up in, like a 40% decline in just attending public meetings, right? That's Bowling alone, Robert Putnam. So that Many people reported not attending one within a year or two. And that used to be taken for granted. So one I would say is join, show up. But the second is to build institutions. Your question was about institutions and what they can do, and we sort of went towards schools. My generation came of the age when we were tearing down institutions left and right. That's really characterized the United States since the 1970s. The greatest generation built institutions, and we've been tearing institutions down ever since. That's because a lot of the institutions, bad had happened under them. But we haven't looked to what good they might have brought in the way that I think we should. Because building those institutions helps bring people together. It encourages and demands compromise. And I think in doing that, you then have people who are willing to work together time and time again. They all have done it. And I think the proof is in once you do it, you know that you can do it again. So those are the two main points I would make on that front.
I will add a couple of thoughts here. As a parent of 2 daughters, I learned that I need to listen more and understand, be empathetic, and really understand that to you, you might have an issue today that might be the most important to you. And to many of us as adults, we might dismiss it as not important. When it comes to schools and young people, I have a youth council where I have high school students advise me on legislation, and they frequently told me, schools and governments and people in power or people in authority, we have barriers. We don't connect with these individuals. So young people tend to have that feeling that I don't want to be part of an institution. So my recommendation to schools is to empower young people to find their authentic selves through the clubs that you serve on, through being more inclusive. I can tell you, even for me personally, if I meet a new person that I've never met before, that I don't understand their background, I might be in a position that I might develop my own preconceived notions about that person. And schools might do the same as institutions. They might not be very inclusive or empowering of young people to be authentic, because we're focused on the academics, the after-school clubs, and so on. Think through, for example, if we empower young people to start thinking about voter registration. Do you know the lowest segment of our society that votes? What is the age range for that? It is the 18 to 24. I promise you, I'm not kidding. If you vote, if you're 18 to 24 and you vote, we don't even have to wait for the future. The future is today. If young people vote, Republican, Democrat, whatever you belong to, our nation would be different today, not tomorrow. But as a parent of 2 young kids, when I talk to my kids, my oldest, she's 19, who are you going to vote for? How do you go about research? Number 1 recommendation, don't use TikTok for recommendations of who to vote for. I'm on TikTok, but I'm not for that purpose, or Instagram. It's extremely difficult for us to spend, for you as a young person, to spend 5 hours to research the 10 or 15 or 20 people on the ballot. It's difficult for us as adults to know who are these individuals and what is their real principles and values versus what they're putting on the website. So how do you go about that? Well, my sense of, or my urgent request for you to think through. We spend hours researching and finding the best deal when you're looking at your shoe game and you're trying to buy stuff on different places and trying to look good and you're trying to invest in stuff. Don't look at us. We don't have, that's not, I see some people looking at us on our panel. We are a different generation, so don't judge us based on what we wear. But all I'm trying to say is sincerely, if you're willing to spend 5 hours on TikTok, or a few hours shopping, or a few hours doing different things, I know that you have the tools and the skills and the abilities to look at maybe 1 or 2 issues that you deeply care about, and find out where do these people stand on. I don't expect you to spend 5, 10, 20 hours researching every single candidate, But voter registration as an institution is extremely important to allow and empower young people in an nonpartisan way to engage in that. Second, as an institution, we have programs at the Indiana State Senate and the General Assembly by which we work with schools. So you can come and tour the State House, meet with elected officials, participate in a program, we call it the PAGE program, P-A-G-E, just like paper page, where you can volunteer for one day and shadow a legislator and work with them. There are so many opportunities to get engaged. The journalism club in your school, there are so many outlets. It's going to boil down to your personal interest and the school's ability to help you unlock that potential.
I think the final thing that I want to add to this would be institutions like Brebeuf, higher education, they need to foster intellectual curiosity. My goal every day is to learn something new. And I'm always excited when I do learn something new. Earlier I talked about the bipartisanship. When I read that article, I was shocked that there was so much bipartisanship in terms of legislation. And I'll never forget that statistic now. But it doesn't always have to be something, it can be a lot of different things in terms of intellectual curiosity. But Brebeuf needs to foster that. And then as students, you guys need to receive that. And every day try to improve yourself. And take something new every day. Learn something new every day. And it can be something educational, that could be something about Taylor Swift. But just learn something new every day.
We have a few minutes left. Oh, I'm sorry. No,
Talking
good.
about, the mayor talking about, people trying to manipulate your minds, and Senator talking about Instagram and TikTok. I think it's just important to note the manipulation in a lot of those when it comes to elections is being fueled by our enemies in Russia and China. So it's not just the other party that's trying to fuel you something negative about political opposition. It's truly coming from our global adversaries. So you really have to question what you're getting in those instances.
I had collected questions from our student body, and one of the themes, and this wasn't one of the prepared questions, so I'm going to not try and catch you off guard here, but there was a theme that came across. How many of you are going to be voting in your first election this year? So for them in the future, other voters in the room, what message do you have for them to not be disenfranchised by apathy and to be an active participant? And we'll close with those remarks.
This is a quick one. I was born 10 years after the Birmingham protests. So 10 years, and so less than a decade from the Voting Rights Act. When I think about your births, for most of you, for those of you who raised your hand, that would have been 2006. You were 10 years after the Monica Lewinsky affair. So just think about how much things have changed in that time. But there were people who are still around who were marching and dying and sitting in, no older than you, simply to exercise the right to vote. And that is not that long ago. And so I think when you remember that, what a just privilege it is to vote, that's what I always think about when, like, how not to get discouraged, is to remember that fighting for the right to even cast a ballot is something that even in this country, which has promised democracy for so long, is in fact still pretty new and pretty novel.
I think back, I don't have too many regrets in life, but one of them is that I used to think when I was in high school that if you weren't exceptional at something, if I wasn't exceptional at something, I might as well not do it. That I had to be, it's all about natural talent, and if I didn't have that natural talent, then somehow the concept of practice never got through my thick skull. But in any case, as you think about voting, don't think about the fact that you have to be an expert on all the issues, and that you have to know the candidates, and you have to have clear political views, and if you don't have all that stuff, you're not going to vote. Just go vote. Just vote. That's really easy. Register and vote. even if you don't know anything about what's going on. Obviously, it's a little better if you do, but just go vote, and it'll start to create a habit that is an essential habit for the future of our country and our world, really, which is the saving democracy. So, over time, you may find a time when it's more convenient or more interesting to you to dig deeper into what the candidates really think, to maybe your values and your beliefs over time start to solidify into a way that you could really connect them to a political candidate. But you don't have to have that on day one. Just go vote. It's really easy, and it's essential.
As part of my work on the House of Representatives Ethics Committee, I had the opportunity to travel to Iraq a couple years ago and help with their elected leaders as they're trying to build their government. And sitting there and talking to these Iraqi leaders who have literally fought, many people they know died, to have the opportunity to have what we have, as broken and ugly as it feels right now, was eye-opening and heartwarming to me. So that's what keeps me in the game, is like, this may not be a perfect system, but it's the best system the world has ever known, and it only works if all of us show up and engage. So do it now. To the mayor's point, educate yourself as much as you can, but get out and do it. There are congressional races in the last 2 years that were decided by 6 votes out of thousands. Biden is president because of 40,000 votes across the whole country. Your vote matters. Every single vote matters.
I have 3 sons. Jack Dillon, Brebeuf Nation lawyer. Bob Dillon, Brebeuf Nation lawyer. He's in Chicago. Stu Dillon, Brebeuf Nation lawyer, working at the United Nations. They have never missed a vote because they believe it's their duty, as it's your duty, to go vote. Please remember that.
I will share with you just a couple of thoughts. One, I firmly believe in the power of hope, and what drives in people is the idea of hope. When I came to the United States, I was raised by a poor family. I did not speak English. I was homeless. And I stand before you today with humility, a person who earned 2 masters and a PhD, who got elected as a state senator and so on. I don't say this to brag, I say this to tell you that if I was able to make it, and by the way, if you don't know, my name is Faddy, which is common in Indiana, correct? So the point I'm trying to tell you, you might have so many barriers in your life that at certain points, I'm speaking with ease today to tell you about my journey, but I promise you, when I was going through these difficulties, it was not easy. I lived through fear, anxiety, and very difficult times. But as you grow older and you reflect on all of these experiences, you look back and you say, I was blessed, I was able to do it, to overcome these challenges. But if I was able to do it and to overcome these challenges, then you are 1,000,000 times more powerful, more empowered, more intelligent than me. And you can do it, and you can dream big. Don't let any human being tell you that you're not worthy or you can't accomplish your dreams. The highest of dreams. Your only enemy who will stop you from accomplishing your dreams is you. If you can't visualize, if you can't see that you can accomplish your goals, you will not accomplish them. The second point is that when we talk about engaging in things, as Mayor Peterson mentioned, you don't have to be the expert in everything. Take a trip with your colleagues and friends to the State House. Do the PAGE program one day. Try to get engaged and see how things work in real life so that you develop a better understanding. But I'll tell you, if you don't engage, you become cynical. You will be on the party or the side of people who don't believe that change is possible. So my recommendation to you, what helped me throughout those difficult times, I had amazing mentors who drove me always to be hopeful. One of them, over the last 15 years, is my martial artist trainer. He taught me, he's from South Korea, and he said, if today is difficult, when you go to sleep, understand that tomorrow will be a better day. And if tomorrow is difficult, understand that next week will be a better week. And if next week is difficult, have the hope that next month is going to be better. And if next month is difficult, understand that next year is going to get better. And in his culture, not my culture, they believe that something good will happen every 10 years. So the idea of hope that something is positive is going to happen drives you, it helps you unlock your potential. So I urge you, I know you're busy, I know you're preparing for college, you are busy with all kinds of activities, you're busy as a young person just with your social life,